At first, it looked like a standard aviation tragedy. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner, Air India Flight 171, took off under perfect weather, with no signs of distress, and just 36 seconds later, disintegrated in a fireball that claimed 241 lives. The world mourned, investigators offered theories, and the story seemed to settle into another painful chapter of aviation history. But then, something unexpected surfaced. A high-definition video of the crash, frame by frame, second by second, was analyzed by a commercial pilot with over 20 years of experience. What he discovered wasn't just an anomaly. It was a digital clue hiding in mechanical silence. A signal no one had spotted before. Something the aircraft did, not by accident, not by sabotage, but by design. Silently, automatically, and fatally. And when the pilot saw it, he didn't speak. He froze. Because what he uncovered wasn't just a technical oversight. It was a nightmare hiding in plain sight. And the mystery of Air India 171 wasn't solved in a lab or a courtroom. It was solved by someone who knew exactly what to look for, because he had flown that same aircraft before. The morning of the crash was unremarkable. The Boeing 787 lifted off from Ahmedabad en route to London. No system errors, no adverse weather, no signs of malfunction. Inside the cabin, passengers buckled in, settled down, and flight attendants began their routine. In the cockpit, everything appeared normal. Throttle engaged, gear retracted, and the aircraft started its ascent. But only seconds later, something impossible happened. Both engines dropped to idle. The aircraft began to lose lift. The stall warnings never activated. And in less than 36 seconds, the plane plummeted into a structure near a hospital, killing nearly everyone on board. Investigators were baffled. There was no explosion, no visible external strike, no sign of smoke or fire. Some suggested a dual-engine failure. Others pointed to flap misconfiguration. But nothing matched the pattern of what the data showed, or rather, what it didn't show. There were no alerts, no frantic pilot calls, just a jetliner that seemed to stop flying without any mechanical justification. The mystery deepened when analysts reviewed the raw crash footage and spotted something that didn't belong. A tiny blur beneath the fuselage, barely visible, but unmistakable to any trained eye. When the pilot reviewing the footage zoomed in, he caught something almost no one else had seen: the ram air turbine, or RAT. A small emergency device designed to deploy only under the most extreme conditions, when the aircraft suffers a total electrical failure or catastrophic hydraulic loss. It's not something you see unless something has gone horribly wrong. And yet, there it was, fully deployed. In the seconds before the crash, the RAT was spinning in the open air, trying to provide just enough backup power to keep critical systems alive. The pilot knew immediately what that meant. The aircraft had experienced a complete systems breakdown mere seconds after takeoff. But that alone wasn't what disturbed him most. It was the timing. The RAT should never deploy during initial climb unless both engines fail or the system believes they have. And that led to an even more disturbing realization. If the RAT was deployed, and if both engines were in idle despite the pilot's inputs, then something inside the aircraft had decided, on its own, that the situation was beyond recovery. That's not a malfunction. That's a machine following protocol, based on faulty assumptions. To most listeners, the crash footage was a blur of wind, static, and chaos. But cleaned-up audio told a different story. Beneath the noise, there was a high-pitched mechanical whirring, the kind of sound that doesn't belong to jet turbines or landing gear. It was the sound of the RAT in full motion, spinning fast enough to generate emergency power. That sound, when paired with the visual confirmation, eliminated all doubt. Something critical had failed. But what stood out was what hadn't failed. The engines were intact. The hydraulics had not been breached. There was no fire. So why had the system activated its last line of defense? This contradiction tore through the investigation. On paper, everything was nominal. Yet the aircraft behaved as though it was dying. And now, with both the audio and visual cues lining up, a new theory emerged. The plane had entered a rare and almost mythical state among pilots. A mode where it thinks it's still on the ground even as it flies through the air. A condition known unofficially as ghost mode. And if true, this wasn't just a strange crash. It was a glimpse into a nightmare scenario where software, not physics, dictates survival. Only one person lived to tell the tale. Seated in 11A near an emergency exit, Vishwas Kumar Ramesh was somehow thrown from the aircraft during the descent and survived with severe injuries. His memories were scattered, fragmented by trauma, but one detail stood out. He described a loud bang followed by flickering lights and an eerie silence inside the cabin. He never heard the engines surge. He never felt the acceleration of a climb. It felt, he said, like the plane was waiting for something, but never got the signal. His testimony shook investigators because it matched precisely what would happen if the aircraft had never transitioned into full flight mode. The landing gear never fully retracted. The flaps moved sluggishly, and the cockpit voice recorder showed the pilots issuing throttle commands the engines ignored. It was as if the aircraft was caught in limbo, flying without knowing it, unable to make decisions because its systems were waiting for a confirmation that never came. And that's when everything snapped into place. A single sensor, the weight on wheels switch, may have failed, keeping the aircraft trapped in a logic loop where it believed it was still grounded. A single wrong assumption, buried in perfect code. And because of that, the most advanced plane in the world became powerless in the face of the sky. In the heart of the Dreamliner lies FADEC, the Full Authority Digital Engine Control System, an intelligent digital brain responsible for managing engine performance. It interprets environmental data, aircraft behavior, and pilot inputs to decide how much thrust to deliver. But FADEC doesn't work in isolation. It depends on a small but critical signal from a sensor called the WOW switch, weight on wheels, which tells the aircraft whether it's in the air or still on the ground. If this signal is incorrect, FADEC can apply the wrong logic in a life-or-death scenario. That's precisely what investigators now believe happened to Flight 171. The data logs didn't show a mechanical breakdown. They showed something more insidious, logic behaving normally inside a completely false context. FADEC, unaware that the aircraft was airborne, idled both engines to protect them, as it would during taxiing or deceleration. It didn't respond to the pilot's attempts to increase thrust because, to the system, the situation didn't call for it. The aircraft wasn't experiencing chaos from its perspective. It was following protocol perfectly within the framework of a sensor that told it, "You never left the ground." That's not failure. That's obedience to the wrong reality. And once that logic was locked in, nothing, not pilot commands, not altitude, not speed, could change its mind. In older aircraft, pilots reign supreme. When something fails, they take over. Manual controls override digital hesitation. But the Dreamliner was designed differently, built with trust in software and layered protections that give the system final authority in specific conditions. Flight 171 tested those boundaries. When the pilots noticed the lack of power, they did what they were trained to do: push the throttles forward. The digital logs confirm it. The command was issued, clearly, quickly, repeatedly. But the engines didn't respond, not because they were damaged, but because FADEC overruled them. The system believed the aircraft was still on the ground, and thrust wasn't necessary. So it denied the input, rejecting human instinct in favor of machine logic. That moment, invisible to passengers and inaudible to crew, was the true point of no return. The pilots had become passengers themselves, locked out of their own aircraft by a logic tree that didn't recognize reality. And what makes this even more chilling is that the system wasn't malfunctioning. It was working exactly as it was programmed to. It's a scenario no one had truly prepared for, when the software that runs the aircraft becomes the final authority, even in error. What made this revelation even more alarming was that it wasn't entirely unprecedented. Digging through older incident reports, aviation analysts uncovered similar anomalies, rare cases where thrust dropped suddenly after takeoff, or RAT systems deployed inexplicably during initial climbs. One report from 2019 described a near disaster in Europe involving the same type of aircraft, where false weight on wheels readings led to momentary loss of power and partial RAT activation. The aircraft survived and the incident was quietly closed. But now, the same symptoms had reappeared, stronger, deadlier, undeniable. Engineers had an informal name for it: ghost mode, a state where the aircraft is physically airborne but logically grounded, trapped in a limbo where systems behave as though flight hasn't begun. It's rare, hard to reproduce, and often dismissed as a fluke. But Flight 171 proved it wasn't fiction. It was a real vulnerability, one that no one truly understood until it killed. The crash was no longer an isolated event. It was the culmination of a series of warnings, missed connections, and underestimated risks. Ghost mode wasn't a glitch. It was a ghost protocol, haunting every aircraft with the same design. As engineers pulled the last fragments of information from the aircraft's flight recorders, one log entry surfaced from deep within the maintenance buffer, buried so far in the system that it was never meant to be part of a crash investigation. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't an error message. It was a plain, technical string of text, mode transition not acknowledged. A phrase that on the surface means nothing to a layperson. But to engineers and pilots, it's the final clue. The moment the aircraft tried to enter full flight mode, and failed. The message indicated that the FADEC system attempted to shift into climb logic, as it should once the gear retracted and lift was sustained. But the transition was blocked. Something, likely a contradictory input from the WOW sensor, prevented the system from accepting the new reality. The plane was flying, yes, but its digital brain refused to acknowledge it. The result? A machine behaving logically within an illogical context. A perfectly functioning system making perfectly deadly decisions. And that single sentence, buried in the buffer, may be the most chilling message ever recorded by a modern aircraft. Because it reveals not chaos, but calm certainty. A jetliner falling from the sky, not in a storm of failure, but in a storm of obedience. A system that didn't break, but never woke up. Air India Flight 171 didn't fall because of a bomb, a fire, or a pilot mistake. It fell because the very thing we've been taught to trust in modern aviation, automation, redundancy, software, did exactly what it was programmed to do. The engines weren't broken, the wings weren't compromised, the pilots weren't confused, and yet the aircraft died mid-air. Why? Because a single sensor told the digital brain of the Dreamliner that it had never left the ground, and everything else followed that lie. In those final seconds, the pilots pushed forward. The commands were logged, the systems heard them, but they did not obey. FADEC ignored the pilots, not with malice, not with error, but with confidence. It believed it was right. It believed there was no emergency. It believed nothing needed to change. And that belief, rooted in a false sensor signal, became unshakable. The aircraft entered a state where the sky itself was irrelevant because the system refused to see it. This wasn't just a technological breakdown. It was a moral one. It was a reminder that when we place total trust in machines to interpret reality, we risk surrendering to certainty over truth. And in a cockpit where speed, instinct, and awareness once ruled, we now face a new danger. Systems that do not doubt themselves, even when they're wrong. The crash of Flight 171 is no longer a mystery. It is a message, a whisper buried in code, a final log line written by a machine that couldn't understand where it was. And that's the true terror of the modern sky. Not turbulence, not sabotage, not even failure, but a system that chooses silence over instinct. Because Flight 171 didn't just crash, it was ignored by the very aircraft meant to protect it. If this story made you question what really keeps us safe at 35,000 feet, then don't let it be just another forgotten tragedy. Subscribe for more deep investigations into the hidden dangers of modern technology. Hit the bell icon, because next time, it might not be a Dreamliner. Share this video with someone who still believes software always makes flying safer. And leave a comment. Should pilots always have final authority, even over the machine?